Just want to welcome everybody again to the November edition of the CVOW Friday Forum. My name is Matt Smith. I'm the Director of Offshore Wind for the Hampton Roads Alliance. We are the region's economic development organization for the Hampton Roads area of Virginia. We're happy to be able to partner on this series of events with Dominion Energy discussing topics around offshore wind and the Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind Project. So today we have a forum focused on port-related activities associated with offshore wind. Fantastic panel for you today here. It'll be moderated by Will Fadu. He's the Vice President of Industry and Government Affairs for the Virginia Maritime Association. With that, I'll turn it over to Will to moderate today's forum.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here with you guys today as we talk about essentially the role of Virginia's maritime economy in the offshore wind supply chain here in Virginia. So my panelists today are going to be G.T. Hollett, who's the Director of Offshore Wind for Dominion Energy, Chris Gullickson, the Director of Economic Development at the Virginia Port Authority, and John Palmer, who's the Operations Superintendent for Seajacks. So what we're going to do is I'd like to first kick things off kind of talking about Virginia's maritime scene at the macro level, and a little bit about who we are at the Virginia Maritime Association and how that plays into offshore wind. So next slide, please. So the Virginia Maritime Association we're a 100-year-old trade association here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, comprising about 500 member companies across the maritime supply chain. So when you think of vessel operators, terminal operators, warehousing, distribution, trucking, cargo owners, and now the emerging offshore wind industry. It's basically a place of, if you're involved in the maritime supply chain in any way, shape, or form, from cradle to grave, or inbound, outbound, it's a place for those type of connections. At a high level, you know, we've really existed for 100 years to promote, protect, and encourage commerce through Virginia's ports in all ways, shapes, or forms. So whether that's a container volume, offshore wind, or any of the other products that we move through here and services we provide. So first and foremost, let's talk a little bit about Virginia's port. So we're the second largest port on the East Coast by tonnage and third largest in container volume. That's the next slide, Matt. And we have about 55 terminals here across the Commonwealth, and that's really exciting. You know, we have the 5 state-owned and operated terminals that are operated by the Virginia Port Authority, and I know Chris is going to talk about that here shortly. With right there in that graphic, center stage is Portsmouth Marine Terminal, and also 50 other privately owned and operated terminals, including Lambert's Point, which many of you may have heard of, which is right across the way and is being considered for offshore wind development. We're the largest coal exporter in the United States, moving about 40% of the nation's metallurgical coal around the world for steel production, which, as you can imagine, is pretty important for things like monopiles and other components. And we're also the largest shipbuilding and ship repair complex in the U.S., home to the world's largest Navy base, and then soon to be the deepest water on the East Coast, which allows us to move bigger ships and more components. And what's more important for offshore wind is when you think about no overhead restrictions. So the ability for us to use these components and move them upright really makes us an attractive place. We move about, over the last few years, on average, about 2,300 vessel calls a year. So we are a pretty busy port. Matt, if you go to the next slide, I have a graphic I love to show that really highlights exactly how busy we are. When you think about the heat map that shows all the vessel moves, you see the Virginia wind energy area off the coast as well. And then you see some magenta boxes and shapes that represent essentially DoD and military activities. So all these things converging in one place here in Virginia, but that's really an opportunity for us to work in a synergistic and harmonized way to promote the growth of all of these different entities. And that's something that we've worked with for stakeholders for several years, including 10 years ago when the VMA got together and basically figured out where we should put that offshore wind energy area, working with the Navy and the Army Corps, Coast Guard, commercial stakeholders, so that we have a shape or a place for offshore wind to grow without hindering any type of commercial operations as well. Ultimately, so that we could have efficient use of our ocean space in spatial planning. Next slide. And this is important to point out, kind of some work we've done recently with the Coast Guard, the offshore wind industry, the state, and the commercial maritime interest to promote where vessels can sail safely in and out of our port. Like I said, our port is growing like crazy, no congestion, which is very important. Thank you to our partners at the Virginia Port Authority. And we want to be able to keep that poised for growth, as well as fostering the growth of our offshore wind industry as well. So what you can see here is plenty of room for vessels to do their thing and plenty of room for offshore wind to grow as well. To that point, recently, BOEM has started to interact with us and several other maritime stakeholders on essentially the new Central Atlantic leasing area, where the next round of these energy areas will go. Next slide. So lastly, I just wanted to touch on a few things on the VMA, because that was a question someone had asked, is what does the association do in all this? So what we are is essentially a convener of the right people, the experts, and then trying to get some thought leadership with those in the regulatory and legislative environments. One of the things that we do have the last few years is our offshore wind committee, which allows all the movers and shakers in the offshore wind space that are interested in being involved in Virginia. They all get involved in this committee. And what's we've been very proud of is several B2B connectivity that's happened since then, several businesses being able to connect contractually just by being in the right room and making those introductions. And also having worked so far with Ørsted, Nexans, Seaway 7, Dominion, and soon to be Seajacks here on some very localized maritime supply chain needs. And again, just getting the right people in the room. Next slide. Lastly, I'll point out that the Virginia Maritime Association is not just a Hampton Roads thing. We are a statewide trade association across the entire state, and these are all of our chapters. So if you're happen to tune in today and you're like, hey, I'd love to get involved in offshore wind or even the maritime industry here in Virginia, chances are we have a chapter and members right in your region as well. So that's enough about me. If you're interested in finding out more about the Virginia Maritime Association or how you can get involved, feel free to go to our website, vamaritime.com, and you can find my contact information there, or just find me on LinkedIn. So with that, I will hand it over to our next speaker.
Well, thank you, Will. I appreciate you giving that macro perspective of the Port of Virginia. I also want to thank Matt Smith and the entire Hampton Roads Alliance team for putting on and hosting today's webinar. Also want to thank my fellow panelists for joining and talking about what is such an exciting thing for our ports here in Virginia around offshore wind. Again, I'm Chris Gullickson, Director of Economic Development. I'm also a board member of the Virginia Offshore Wind Development Authority. I've had the really good fortune here at the port to be involved with offshore wind for the past few years and really focusing on how we, the Port of Virginia and the Commonwealth, reposition Portsmouth Marine Terminal to really be the wind hub of the future. You can go to the next slide, please. So I thought I'd just take a well, as Matt gets the slide going, I will take a second to kind of step back and talk about how we got to this point with Portsmouth Marine Terminal and really what the Virginia Port Authority is made up of. As Will mentioned, the Port of Virginia is comprised of 6 terminals spread throughout the Commonwealth. Here in this great photo, it really encapsulates and shows the fine harbor that has unlimited air draft with very easy and direct access to open ocean, but also our facilities within the Hampton Roads Harbor. We have 2 primary container facilities, which I think anyone on this webinar has probably heard there are supply chain hiccups at most ports in the US, but not here in Virginia. Over the past 48 months, the Commonwealth and the Virginia Port Authority has invested well over $800 million at our 2 primary container handling facilities by adding automation, which equated to additional capacity. And so we find ourselves in a moment in time as we're dealing with record volumes today at both of our container operations without any congestion. So we're very fortunate to be that one, I would say, star in a situation where most ports are inundated and overrun. We are still functioning at a very fluid level and providing quality service to our customers and gaining new customers every day based on the experiences our existing customers are seeing and our performance. But with those investments, what that's allowed for the Commonwealth of Virginia and the Port Authority to do is take a legacy terminal, which is Portsmouth Marine Terminal, a facility that's served a variety of functions. In fact, it was handling containers up until the beginning of COVID. So 23 months ago, we were still moving shipping containers through Portsmouth Marine Terminal. But as we've added additional capacity and the projects at NIT, Norfolk International Terminals, and Virginia National Gateway have completed, it has really allowed for us to continue that focus and develop a strategy to attract various aspects of offshore wind to Virginia and also to Portsmouth Marine Terminal. So next slide, please. So today, here's where Portsmouth Marine Terminal stands. Back on January of 2020, we were very fortunate to announce a lease arrangement with Dominion, with Ørsted, and that's on the right side of the screen. That was for up to 40 acres, and that was our first sort of, I would say, public announcement that PMT was being repositioned for offshore wind, and you can see it on the right side of the screen. And we continue that dialogue with those folks. We had obviously knowing the opportunities around CVOW and what is obviously the largest single commercial offshore wind project on the U.S. East Coast here in Virginia with Dominion Energy. We obviously had ongoing conversations, and those conversations equated and developed towards or to a 72-acre footprint there on the front side of Portsmouth Marine Terminal for the staging, handling, and loadout of CVOW and hopefully many more projects to come. I mean, this is the real exciting nature and opportunity for our region and our Commonwealth is not to only be a hub to support these local projects like CVOW and Avangrid and North Kitty Hawk, but really serving as that East Coast hub. And that's the approach really we're taking and looking at attracting what is a new industry to our harbor. And then finally, and most recently, the Port of Virginia made an announcement in locating an OEM. In fact, in this case, Siemens Gamesa Renewable Energy, SGRE. This was their first announcement of a U.S. facility. So we're very excited, as SGRE is the preferred turbine supplier for Dominion Energy's project. But for those of you who are keeping tabs on the offshore wind developments along the coast, it's quite apparent that SGRE continues to capture market share and be, as they are globally, a leader in offshore wind turbine production. So we were very excited that a few weeks back, 3 weeks, I guess, to date, we made the public announcement that we'd reached agreement with SGRE to create a blade finishing facility. And that's where they will take green blades and run them through a final finishing process there at PMT, at first to support the CVOW project, and then again, many projects to come. We're very excited to see a lot of hard work went into this. It equates to probably a $200 million plus investment by SGRE. We're talking over 300 jobs associated or tied to activity induced by SGRE, as well as monies provided by the Commonwealth to enhance or improve the site conditions for the construction of this manufacturing coating facility. So it is really an effort that was undertaken, and it was a collaborative effort with help and assistance from the state, the VEDP, the Hampton Roads Alliance, and other stakeholders that have been very active and involved in helping the Port of Virginia and guiding us to position PMT to where we are today. And so with that, I will conclude my remarks, leaving time for some Q&A, and excited to continue this dialogue. So again, thank you, and I will hand it to the next presenter. John, GT.
Hey, thanks, Chris. And let me echo your appreciation to the Hampton Roads Alliance for sessions like this, where we can chat with folks about what activities occurring and how to continue to be engaged with the project. Next slide, please. So I'm quickly going to move through some of the project background, but want to focus a bit in this session on the port and next steps with contracts that Dominion's taking. So again, just for those of you that may not have seen it, so the project that we're talking about is a 2.6 gigawatt commercial project which is supported by the Virginia Clean Economy Act, passed in 2020 by the legislature and signed into law by Governor Northam. It builds on our successful 2-turbine pilot project. You see the picture of that here. And it's in a lease area 27 miles off of Virginia Beach, approximately 113,000 acres. At its peak output, the commercial project will power up to 660,000 homes. And I'll show you the schedule here on the next slide. We're scheduled to be in service by the end of 2026. Next slide. Thanks, Carmen. Or sorry, Matt's controlling. So this slide, you've seen us, if you've seen our presentation in the past, we had a milestone slide with the words and the dates, but we thought we'd convert that to more of a visual here. So what you see is our commercial activity on the top, where major contracts have been executed. We announced several of those at the beginning of the month, and I'll show you those contracts here in a second. They supported the filing we made with the Virginia State in that regulatory line for the review of the regulated project here in the Commonwealth of Virginia, which kicked off earlier this month and is expected to be complete by the third quarter of 2022. We also are negotiating a vessel charter with the Charybdis vessel, the wind turbine installation vessel that's a non-regulated entity here in Dominion. That vessel's coming out in late 2023. It'll serve some projects for Ørsted and Eversource in the Northeast. And then the intention is that we'd bring it here to Virginia to install the wind turbines for the commercial project. So we're working on that. That also has to be reviewed by the state. Knowing it's 2 Dominion affiliates, we need to show the market competitiveness of that contract. But obviously at Dominion as a whole, we believe that vessel's very valuable in the market and creates that U.S. flagged solution to installation. The other regulatory process that's occurring is the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management review. That's the Federal National Environmental Policy Act review. That kicked off about a year ago and is scheduled to move through the BOEM process and get us a decision in the second quarter of 2023. So with those Virginia process living inside of the timeline of the federal process, that gets us the ability to have our permits issued and start construction. We would start the onshore portion of the project in late 2023. It would be ready to energize by the third quarter of 2025. So then we would have offshore construction starting slightly after that. First major component going in would be those monopile foundations in May of 2024. And then that offshore construction window goes out to 2026. And that'd be, monopiles, cable, offshore substations, wind turbines, et cetera. Next slide, please. So using the slide that Chris showed a little bit earlier with the layout at PMT, wanted to highlight a number of items. I've touched on a couple of these already. One of them is that U.S. flagged offshore wind turbine installation vessel, the Charybdis. That vessel will be home ported here in Hampton Roads and have a crew of approximately 120 folks. Portsmouth Marine Terminal, then, the area that Chris showed, and we got in the blue here, it's approximately 72 acres. That is an area that we'll use to stage major equipment. You can kind of see the outlines of monopile foundations, transition pieces, and then the wind turbine pre-assembly area, which has the nacelles, the tower sections, the blades. So that'd be staging and pre-assembly. And we're expecting that that'll be 60 jobs here onshore, supporting the movement of those equipment on and off of ships in support of the project construction. I won't echo the blade finishing facility. Chris did a great job of mentioning that. Just highlighting here the $200 million plus of investment Siemens Gamesa is making in that project, and then that creates another 310 jobs, right? So you start to see these jobs stacking up and building into some of the values that we've shown folks in the past. And then just highlighting, we also have a memorandum of understanding with the North American building trades to work with them collaboratively to use union labor in certain facets of the project. Certainly onshore construction will be a large area for labor, but they'll be involved, through existing relationships the port already has with stevedores, longshoremen at the port, and then other opportunities where we're looking to develop that expertise here in the U.S. for offshore construction. Next slide. Really quickly, the firms that we've announced at the beginning of the month, Siemens Gamesa, we had announced quite a while ago as the preferred supplier for wind turbines. The monopiles are with a firm named EEW, transition pieces with Blatt Industries. And then the offshore substation, both the foundation and the electrical topside, you see sort of in the diagram below, that's a partnership between Blatt Industries and Semco. And then on transport and installation, both, again, a partnership between DEME Offshore and the Prysmian Group, Prysmian being a cable supplier, and they'd have the scope for cable, providing the cables and then getting those installed. Next slide. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit then about an operations base, right? So not only would we have the area at Portsmouth Marine Terminal for the construction staging equipment, we're also exploring a number of areas in Hampton Roads. And in our construction operations plan, we talk about, Will mentioned Lambert's Point. We're certainly talking about an opportunity to put this operations base over at Lambert's Point, or possibly at a Port of Virginia site, maybe some other sites that we're looking at. But we think Lambert's Point looks pretty good right now. But what would that op space be? It'd be a building on shore, right? So we'd have offices, areas where the folks that go out and help service the wind turbines would have sort of their home base, along with data center for the information to help operate the wind farm, and maritime coordination center would be there. And ultimately our offshore wind team, which right now is split between Richmond and Hampton Roads, we would all wind up locating in that Hampton Roads area. There'd also be warehousing for parts and pier services for some of the vessels that you see below, right? Crew transfer vessels. We already have the one operating, the Endeavor, which Atlantic Wind Transfers operates for us under a charter that's helping to support the pilot project maintenance. We would bring at least one more CTV, crew transfer vessel, to the project. And then in the middle, this service operations vessel, you can see the concept of a walk-to-work vessel, right? So it's dynamically positioned. It's got that gangway that reaches over to a transition piece versus having to push up on the base of the turbine and have folks climb up the ladder from the CTV to the transition piece. And then we mentioned Charybdis, right? Charybdis will be home ported in Hampton Roads. Next slide. Okay, thanks. So I just wanted to highlight some folks that asked about the economic benefits. You've probably seen this slide, and we can come back to it just in the interest of time. But the Mangum study that we've talked about in the past shows approximately 900 jobs and 143 million in economic impact for the construction period, and then 1,100 jobs and almost 210 million during operations. So what we're doing right now is, with the firms that you just saw on the prior slide, we're starting to try and take these jobs from the concept or study phase and line them up to the specific contractors and the secondary and tertiary contracts and economic impacts that come out of that, and work with workforce development partners in the area that we've already been engaged with. Look for vendor and subcontract opportunities, events like Matt mentioned at the beginning, where we could have these contractors, maybe through the Alliance, do some outreach, some networking events, and get local companies connected directly to those contractors. Next slide. So then at Dominion, we've also stood up a team focused on turning that Mangum study into reality, right? So this Virginia supply chain team is made up of a group of folks inside of our company, from the project team, including both the onshore and offshore components of the project, our operations team, supply chain representatives, and then policy and outreach folks to help stay connected as we move these CVOW major equipment providers to identifying how to maximize opportunities for Virginia businesses and job creation to hit those estimates in that Mangum study, and see if we can even have a larger impact. As you see from some of the job numbers we gave you earlier, we're starting to see those come to fruition through the Siemens effort, through the work at the port, the vessels that are coming to support the project. So next slide. This is my last one, and then I'll turn it over to John Palmer. But in early November, we kicked off this supply chain team. And again, they're working with these major equipment suppliers to identify the direct and subcontracted commercial opportunities that we can take advantage of in Virginia. So as we identify those scopes of work and specific opportunities, these providers will come out and engage with local, regional, and state economic development authorities, trade organizations such as Hampton Roads Alliance and the Virginia Maritime Association, to share those opportunities, get out in front of their members and in their network. And then the company will host construction expositions and meetings between those businesses and the major equipment providers. So it's important to know you can go register your business on the Dominion Energy Supply Chain portal. I'll put it in the chat here in a minute. It's found on our Coastal VA Wind site. And then the Commonwealth Supply Chain website hosted by the Hampton Roads Alliance. We can take the information and interest from the firms that register there and share them with the major equipment providers and get you on events, mailing lists for these events. So again, working with this group, starting to take the concept down to the tactical is our next step. So we're going to be working through that in the first quarter of 2022 and begin even more significant outreach in the second quarter of 2022. So we look forward to that. With that, I will turn it over to John Palmer and let him introduce Seajacks to you.
Thanks, GT. Okay, good morning, everybody. My name's John Palmer. I'm the Operations Superintendent for Seajacks UK. I look after the operations and maintenance of the Seajacks fleet, and I'm responsible for the project management of the agreement that we have with Dominion, supporting the build phase of Charybdis and supporting the preparations and ongoing operations of the Charybdis once the vessel's delivered and starting to work and install some of these wind farms. Next slide, please. Okay, so who are we? Seajacks UK, we're offshore installation contractor. We're headquartered in Great Yarmouth on the east coast of the UK. We've been in the offshore market since its inception in the UK. We do installation of the turbines, transition pieces, the jackets, monopole foundations. We also do accommodation services for the offshore substation commissioning, hookups, etc. And we also do O&M maintenance and the major component replacements. We also operate in oil and gas. Primarily, the company was originated to start in oil and gas, but we have 80 to 90% of our work comes from renewables now, and we are dedicated to wind turbine installation vessels. Next slide, please. So we're currently the owner and operator of currently the world's largest and most capable offshore wind installation vessel, which is the Seajacks Scylla. As you can see there in the picture, the Charybdis is actually going to be a little bit larger than the Scylla. Just to give you a size comparison, we need to do this for a US monument as well, really. But if anybody knows the Canary Wharf in London, the big high rise where all the bankers work, when the Scylla is jacked up to full height with the crane extended, we're actually 1 meter taller than the Canary Wharf building itself as well. Next slide, please. So we've installed over 500 turbines, which represents 1.5 gigawatt of power. And we've done that across Europe and Asia as well. We've actually done projects in Asia, and we're currently there now. Next slide, please. So we've also done foundations. We do the monopole foundations and the jacket type foundations as well. We won't be doing any of those with the Charybdis. The Charybdis is based purely as a wind turbine installation vessel, but due to our development and the way that we try and incorporate flexibility within the vessel, we will have the ability to to do foundation projects as well, supporting the offshore wind in the US. Next slide, please. So 2019, we've installed, just a little bit of our experience. We installed the first large-scale offshore wind farm in Taiwan. One of the major difficulties that we do have out there is earthquakes. We went through a few earthquakes while we were installing as well. And a lot of the guys on board had sort of noted that it was just like an extra bit of wind or a large wave hitting the vessel. I certainly didn't think that when I was in the 17th floor of a high-rise hotel at the same time. But yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, there's another picture of the Seajacks Scylla installing jackets on the Moray East project. I'm not too sure if many of you know about the incident with the crane failure on the Orion. We took over that project to support the installation phase for the jackets. Next slide, please. That's just showing you a substation. We're lifting a substation in place as well. We're currently the only contractor who's placed one of these. The substation there, you can see, was just over 1,000 ton. The lifting capacity of the Scylla is 15,000 ton. And the Charybdis is going to be significantly larger at 2,200 ton. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is just a recap of Japanese offshore wind farm that we've done. This is a T&I project that we've done as well, which is transport and full installation of all the components to build a complete wind farm. Next slide, please. That's just a picture of us doing some piling and hammering with the Seajacks Zaratan, which is one of our medium-sized vessels. Next slide, please. So as many of you may know, that we were acquired by Eneti fairly recently, back in August, and we're currently listed on the New York Stock Exchange. With Eneti coming into us, they have got very strong growth ambitions throughout the renewable industry, both in Europe, US, and Asia as well. Next slide, please. So Seajacks and Dominion. So Seajacks actually started working on this project back in June 2016. I was part of the team that started putting a proposal together to look at how we can support the US market with the installation plans. We saw quite a while ago that there was some potential opportunities where we could help. And then in December 2018, Dominion Energy became our US partners, and we've worked together ever since 2018. Next slide, please. So the Seajacks Charybdis, as I mentioned, we are constructing the installation jack up down in Brownsville at Keppel Amfels, and the NG16000 will be the largest Gusto designed to date, capable of installing next generation turbines, monopiles, transition pieces, etc., and major component replacements of up to 12 megawatt and above. We can operate in up to water depths of 65 meters. The majority of the wind farms off the East Coast are very similar to the North Sea water depths, and we're obviously built in the US, and we're going to be Jones Act compliant, and the home base will obviously be in the region as well. Next slide, please. So that's just a consideration and deck layout plan there. The actual deck of the Charybdis is going to be 5,400 meters in deck area. I'm not too up to speed on my imperial conversions. I need to get on top of that a little bit better. But yeah, that just gives you a good indication of how big the vessel is going to be. The turbine blades there, I believe they're the 72 meter Siemens Gamesa blades. So that gives you a good representation of the size of the vessel as well. We can carry around about 11,000 tons of variable deck load as well, to be able to meet a lot of the installation requirements for these turbines. Next slide, please. So the agreement that we've got with Blue Ocean Energy Marine, which is a division of Dominion, and as GT mentioned, that we're in the unregulated side of business. So we're providing the operations advisory and technical support agreement. So that gives support to the group for operational, IT, finance, project engineering, installation services, crew, resource, sales and marketing support. So we're fully behind and aligned with Dominion Energy on this project. Next slide, please. So what do we need? We're obviously going to be based in Portsmouth area. We're going to need the full suite of services that a normal home ported vessel will be within the region. So it will be consumables from personal protective equipment for the crew, right through to full mobilizations for projects, all the sea fastening and grillage that we will need. You know, we have operational conditions and limitations up to 3.5 meters of different wave height. And when you have a full tower and nacelle and blades on deck, we obviously need them structures to be very robust and technically analysed to ensure that we do that. We obviously need repair, ongoing vessel, normal operations and maintenance of the vessel, inspection and testing, and all the support infrastructure that goes around that as well, from hotels to cabs to restaurants, etc. I think that's the next slide. I think that's it from me. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to some any questions and answers. And if I certainly can't answer them straight off, then I'll get back to you.
Excellent. Well, thank you to all our guest speakers here on the panel today. It's a pleasure to work with this team. We see each other quite a bit. It's really more like a family. I know that's cheesy to say, but that's what we are here. So what we're going to do is move into a question and answer period. Now, I see a lot of people using the chat. I also encourage you, it's a lot easier if right next to the chat you use the Q&A function, because that allows the speakers, they could also answer in writing too. So some of these we'll answer live, and the others we can answer right there in the Q&A text box. We also had several questions submitted in advance. Thank you for that. That really allowed us to shape what we presented to you so that it was really relevant to what you wanted. So looking through the swath of questions that were submitted earlier, really the focuses here were about, okay, lots of people have heard these project updates before, but now let's talk jobs and now let's talk contract opportunities. So that's some of the main buckets I'm going to put these questions in today, and then we'll also keep an eye on what's going on in the Q&A box to answer as well. So I want to kick off this first question to GT. You get to go first. This is a two-part question. Does offshore wind generate the need for additional industries to co-locate here in Hampton Roads beyond the big announcements at PMT? And how can communities outside of Hampton Roads benefit from offshore wind investments that may not be like a port facility?
Sure, great question. So on the first part, you know, other businesses that we can look to attract to the area. So I think, you know, just thinking about sort of the summaries that we've done today on the development of the hub, offshore wind hub at Portsmouth Marine Terminal, right? So that I mean, you think about the extensions of that. And you know, don't forget, like Chris showed you, right? Ørsted has an option on 40 acres that they still can act on, and you know, Ørsted's active up and down the U.S. East Coast. You know, they got some potential projects up in Maryland, and even further north. You could stretch the legs from Portsmouth to get, you know, fairly deep into the Northeast projects, right? So we're likely to attract you know, vessels. I mean, we're gonna have a vessel spread, meaning a variety of vessels supporting this project that are gonna come into Hampton Roads and need those port services like John talked about, right? So you're gonna have that, everything from fuel bunkering to repairs and maintenance to supplies and lodging for those crews when they're coming on or off board their ships, right? So you get sort of that natural economic outcome or extension. But I think we're also very encouraged by the potential for other manufacturing to come to Hampton Roads, be it at a Port of Virginia facility, the Lambert's Point site that we've talked about. I can tell you, having just come from an industry event last night, there are a lot of folks in the industry, be it vessel providers looking to home base, tugs and barges, folks looking at other equipment opportunities, other staging opportunities, right? We've got the Kitty Hawk project from the region just to our south that has a construction operation plan in for a portion of their lease area. And as Ashley McLeod will tell you, if you're seeing her updates, they're looking to put another construction operation plan in for the remainder of their project, likely at some point in 2022. You've got the Central Atlantic Task Force starting to gear up, Will, which you referenced for other lease areas. So as you start to see that project concentration continue to come to the region here, that gets folks like cable manufacturers, maybe coating or secondary steel work on a next project for monopiles or transition pieces. That starts to come to the area, becomes more cost competitive as you get that domestic location. You just need to get the scale there to be able to get a manufacturer confident in building out a facility. But I'd say we're very encouraged that CVOW, Kitty Hawk, the potential Maryland projects create that foundation. And then we have the MOU between the governors of Virginia, North Carolina, and Maryland, which also allow for some regional cooperation to keep bringing things to this area. Will, your other question, sorry to ramble on a bit, but wanted to make sure I hit that one pretty discreetly. So for the state as a whole, the Commonwealth as a whole, I mean, not everything has to be pierside, right?
Right.
I think a lot about the maintenance that we're going to have for these 176 turbines, right? Gaskets, electronics, the like we talked about, some of these services. You don't have to be right in Hampton Roads at a pierside location unless you have a very, very heavy piece of equipment. With what Chris has talked about in the past, the truck and rail infrastructure coming into the Port of Virginia and the Hampton Roads area allow us to work with folks around the state on product, but also, the training. We haven't talked much about it, but the training for offshore wind. I mean, that does not have to be on the pier side. If you're going to do a full general worker offshore, you need some water, but that can be a lake, right? And so I know several folks in the state are looking at expanding. Certainly out in Southwest Virginia, we've got some partners that are looking at that. So I think as this task team is gearing up, as we talk about folks that are on this call who have ideas or thoughts about things that we can connect, I think going from the higher level, having these contractors on board and getting tactical about these, I think is really exciting next step for us.
Thanks, GT. So I want to add quickly to that. So it's similar to GT, both he and I have worked on kind of mega projects around the country. And what's neat is when you see these huge announcements for like these massive tier 1 companies that come in and land, just because you don't particularly operate in that specific space, you don't need to be discouraged, because for every single one of those primary contractors, there's secondary, tertiary suppliers that are all needed. And you might be listening today from Southwest Virginia or the Valley, and you make some sort of widget or bolt or gasket or something. And chances are someone in this supply chain, as we build it out, is going to need it. So I would definitely encourage you, sign up for all these websites that have been mentioned where you can get procurement and vendor information. Definitely keep participating in the Fantastic Friday forums. I know Matt works really hard on that as well. And then quite selfishly, folks, the plug here is, and then you might really want to consider being involved with either the Hampton Roads Alliance or the Virginia Maritime Association, so that you can really stay up to speed with the latest and greatest. So next question, and I do encourage my speakers you can be answering questions via text if you like in the Q&A box. So we're going to jump over to Chris, because now that all these announcements for Portsmouth Marine Terminal have been announced, there are lots and lots of vendors and suppliers and contractors who are interested in what the next steps look like to get involved in bidding on the site upgrade and improvement. So Chris, any thoughts on that?
Sure. Thank you, Will. And just to add a little additional comments on the last question, I think this is when we think about communities outside of the harbor and throughout the state. I mean, this is where Virginia, as a state with a strong base of manufacturing and especially marine maritime manufacturing, is such a nice complement to what offshore wind is going to present to us. So just another reason why I think there's such a high level of excitement and optimism around this really landing and being Virginia and Hampton Roads being a hub for offshore wind. In regards to PMT and the site improvements, yes, there is substantial improvements necessary to bring that facility up to the quality and load bearing capacity that is required for the staging and handling of offshore wind turbine components. As I mentioned, PMT is a legacy facility which has served to function very, very well, but we're going to be experiencing and seeing weights and requirements that far exceed any facility's capacity at this point. And that's one of the challenges the entire U.S. East Coast and really all ports face, is the need to make infrastructure improvements. So to kick that off with Dominion Energy, we are already underway and we will be managing those improvements. The permitting process is very much underway along with design. I would expect by all means that in the next 2 months to come, there will be a pre-bid document on the phased improvements there at PMT. So for those of you, on the call, I would assume and hope you're on the EVA web portal through the state's procurement process. So that's always, I think, important that you are registered there, and we will go through our Port of Virginia procurement process to procure contracts to make those infrastructure improvements, which are substantial. It'll be a phased improvements, both on the wharf with necessary dredging and also on the land side to bring up the land bearing capacity. So these are all projects currently underway, and I would expect construction to begin second half of 2022, as we also work in sequence or in parallel with the blade operation. Again, that permitting design process well underway and construction to begin in the years to come. So a lot of activity, a lot of opportunity. It's good to be obviously on the front side of these opportunities. So I would expect, like I said, more pre-bid documents to come out here, and definitely excited to see what level of interest these projects gain from the industry.
Thanks, Chris. All right, so I want to shoot over to John, who in this case is our vessel operations expert. So one of the questions that came in was, okay, we talked earlier, we have this super busy port. We have naval activity, we have commercial activity that's growing, lots of ships coming in and out, all kinds of things going on. And the question was, so do we expect the new wind industry vessel activity, so CTVs, SOVs, construction vessels, how's that impact or what kind of impact is that going to have on our daily port logistics, if any? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, so from my perspective, there's it's potentially a huge increase. Since I've been in the industry since 2009 in the UK, we used to go out to tender for crew transfer vessels, and in 2009 we had 3 respondents, and I would have said 3 or 4 years later we had 67 responders to a tender. So that gives you just an indication of what can happen from a small CTV perspective. And you also have the special operations vessels that are now becoming more prevalent in the industry to be able to deliver the turbine technicians to actually live and work out in the wind farm. And obviously all of these vessels that are going to be operating within the wind farm still all need to come back to port, and they all need the same infrastructure and some specialist infrastructure in and around your region, like the Portsmouth area. So it can have a massive impact and are very important for some areas of regeneration, and it's all supported with local people, especially the sort of smaller vessels as well. You don't want travel and crew from all around the US. You want to have local people operate in these areas, and local people who know the waterways, most importantly.
Great. No, I do appreciate that. And I will highlight from our perspective at the Virginia Maritime Association, like I mentioned, very busy port, but we have great relationships when you think about the daily level of coordination that goes on between the Virginia pilots that bring in all these vessels, the Navy Fleet Forces Command, the different commercial entities that are receiving vessels and vessel operators, and the Coast Guard who manages all of that. So there's been quite extensive conversations over the last years about how all that's going to work together. We're still ironing out the finer details, but it's my personal view that we have an awesome port here, and so to put some more vessels in, we can work that out because we already have good relationships kind of on that deconflicting mitigation. So, all right, well, let's jump over to another question. We do honor your time, and we'll have a hard stop around 10 o'clock. So let's talk about jobs in the next generation. And this is open to any of my panelists here. I liked this question. So what advice does the panel have for high school students that are interested in seeing and being a part of this offshore wind opportunity on the East Coast? And that's open to anyone. I'll throw that one out there.
Hey, well, I'm happy to jump in. Yeah. So it's a great question. And actually, Dominion, we've had the opportunity to be working with Virginia Beach Public Schools, and they have the environmental studies focus program that they've got, junior and senior cohorts going through. And we've had the opportunity for several of us to go in and speak with that group. Really interesting group of folks to engage with and see what they're thinking about. But I realize this question is broader than that, right? But so just thinking about the opportunities, the size that the industry is expected to grow to, and the variety of positions, I would say, just get sort of educated about this industry, right? There's a lot of forums like this, not just through the Hampton Roads Alliance, but also groups with companies beyond, Dominion and Avangrid and others that are probably worth looking at and understanding sort of the scope of offshore wind. But when you think about it, we'll have jobs everywhere from entry level to PhDs, right? So the local workforce development efforts that are happening with our engagement out to the primary and secondary schools, also with the community colleges, workforce training partners. So you get sort of that group that has got some great focus on wind turbine technicians, electricians, welding, those sort of pipelines, and again supported a lot complementary to the maritime industry here in Hampton Roads. So you got that path. You've also got the opportunity to go into a program like environmental science, right? Support the permitting, the evaluation of marine life and birds, et cetera, both onshore and offshore, by the way, right? We're gonna hire obviously technicians on the operations side. We've got engineering teams here in the project side that, if somebody wants to pursue a more technical bent, you could go that way. Marine coordination, right? So coordinating all these vessels during construction and then in the operations period. I mean, with 176 wind turbines, that service operation vessels out there nearly 365 days a year on sort of duration cycles going out there. So I guess the breadth is large, but for the high school student, I think it'd be, hey, reach out to your counselors, your guidance counselors, connect with our Dominion team. We're happy to come in and give presentations and help folks sort of think about what they might have interest in and how we can help you get into a training program at whatever level that appeals to that student.
I'll just add, I think, with our three-state agreement, for those of you maybe are unaware, the Commonwealth, along with Maryland and North Carolina, have entered, the governors have a sort of a three-state agreement. And I know workforce development is one of those objectives within the agreement that I think has gotten a lot of attention and something that we will continue to solidify and find ways for all folks to find, opportunities within the offshore wind industry. And I also think locally, as mentioned, GT and the high school students, I feel like, Dominion, as well as Hampton Workforce Council has done really great outreach to those counselors. And even if today, maybe some of the programs aren't in place for, offshore wind technician skills, there's still similar type training available. And so some of those dual degree with, high school students taking classes both at the community college level and at their respective school, those are systems and processes already in place. So it's pretty exciting that, I think we're just adding to what are the offerings and opportunities for the citizens here of Hampton Roads.
Thanks for that. And I'll throw my final 2 cents in before kicking it back to Matt. Is again, we're talking about a supply chain. So you have these direct jobs. We're talking about turbine technicians with vessel operations, heavily specialized things. But we're building and growing a supply chain. So for every single one of those, we also need things like shoreside support, trucking, warehousing, distribution, and all kinds of support activities. So there's lots of jobs, and to be as direct or indirectly involved as you could want to be. And by staying close to organizations such as the Alliance, the Workforce Council, Mid-Atlantic Maritime Academy, all these great just resources out there, with a little bit of Googling and emailing, you can find those out. So I want to thank again all our panelists, and I want to thank you all for spending an hour with us on a Friday morning. And I'm going to hand it back over to the guy who's becoming quickly the smartest offshore wind guy in the region, Matt Smith with the Alliance. Thank you, Matt.
I appreciate that, Will. That I think I might cede that title to others, but I'll take it today. Really appreciate your moderating a fantastic discussion this morning, and also want to thank GT, Chris, and John for their participation on the panel. Just a couple of quick housekeeping notes going forward. We will not have a December Friday forum, but we'll be distributing kind of a newsletter about what we've discussed over the year. So look forward to that. Also, look forward to a survey we'll be sending out probably the week after Thanksgiving. We want to hear what you want to learn about in 2022, and also tell us what we've done well and maybe haven't done well with these forums. Their purpose is to help educate the industry, so we want to have that feedback from you. And I'll say finally that a focus of our activity in 2022, as GT mentioned, is really about how we can facilitate engagement between the local supply chain and those major suppliers for the CVOW project. So look forward to a lot of activity from the Alliance and the VMA and others around that. And with that, I'll wish everybody a great Friday, and thanks for joining the November CVOW Friday Forum.